seats so we can get started with this last panel of the day. Okay. All right. So let's please be seated so we can get started. Now, this last panel of today's program is not just focused on the Black Sea region and the Caucasus. We just thought that since we are in Turkey, and Turkey is such an important regional player, and Turkey is in the news not just for the Black Sea and the Caucasus, but for developments around its neighborhood, that we will extend this panel discussion here among experts would be one that would deal with Turkey, where Turkey is going in general, in terms of its foreign policy orientation. So, and what I've asked the panelists is to, I've sent them, but it's up to them if they want to stick to it, a series of questions, of possible questions or issues that could be raised regarding Turkey's future direction. And we are lucky in a sense because, you know, we do have a distinguished panel. From what I understand, there are 3 international relation professors that are university presidents here in Turkey, and 2 of them are sitting on this panel. And, well, this is and both of them are very well-known authorities in international relations. So let me just give a brief introduction to everybody here. We'll start off with Mustafa Aydin, who spoke to you earlier, the rector of Kadir Has University. He has been rector here since February 2010, and an established professor of international relations, having received his MA and PhD from Lancaster University, long-time faculty member at Ankara University at the Faculty of Political Science, where he became a full professor in 2005, and he also worked at the University of Economics and Technology, TOB in Ankara, and then, as I said, he moved here. He has also been a member of TEPAD, a big institute in Ankara. He's also the president of the International Relations Council of Turkey, and for the last few years, a very close and valued colleague in terms of writing and studying Black Sea security issues. Then we have Fuat Keyman, who, well, Keyman. And you see, I've been here for 2 years and I can't pronounce the names correctly. But then again, nobody can pronounce my last name, so. No, it's not. Who is a professor of international relations at Sabancı University and also the director of the Istanbul Policy Center, which is, even though Sabancı University is far away, the IPC is actually very close to here. He is a regular contributor to the Radical newspaper, and also he has a TV program where he makes political commentary on Turkish and global politics. He works on issues of democratization, globalization, international relations, civil society, Turkey-EU relations, and he is the author of many books. Next to him is, as I said, the other rector, Shule Kut, who has been rector of Okan University since September 2010. Is that right? Yes. And before she became rector of Okan University, she was a long-standing faculty member at Istanbul University, including being its vice-rector for a long period between 2000 and 2007, as well as the dean of the Faculty of Economics and Administrative Sciences there between 2005 and 2008. Her research interests include foreign policy analysis, Turkish foreign policy, with an emphasis on the Balkans, the Caucasus, Central Asia, Turkey-US relations, and Balkan politics. She's the author of many books and articles on these issues, and she serves on the editorial board of several academic journals in Turkey and abroad. And our last panelist is another academic, Philip Robbins, a reader in Middle East, he is leader in Middle East politics and faculty fellow at St. Catherine's College at Oxford University of Oxford. A career that has also included journalism, policy studies, consultancy, and now in academia. Began being engaged in the Middle East in 1976 on, where he lived and worked in Israel. Has also been based in Jordan, working for the BBC and The Guardian. Also worked for the Economist Intelligence Unit, and at some stage then switched to academia, and has also been a visiting professor here at Bosphorus University in Istanbul. And of course, he's very well known as the author of a book that he wrote in 2003, and I think it was reissued in 2009, Suits and Uniforms, Turkish Foreign Policy under the Cold War, during the Cold War. So, as you can see, our experts know, it suggests, according to their, based on their CVs, they should know the issues. We shall test it now, whether they do know the issues. So what I suggest we do, this is a roundtable discussion. I suggest that I would like to give each one of them about 5 minutes to sort of tell us what they think of exactly what the topic of this roundtable discussion is. Quo Vadis Turkey, where's Turkey going, given the current context. And once they're done with their brief exposés, we'll have a round of discussion among us here, and then I'll open the floor to you to ask your questions. So I'll take it again in the order I introduced them, and so Professor Aydin, please. So I think it's on. No? Okay. Is it?
All right, thank you, Dimitri. When my 5 minutes up, just let me know, and I'll finish in another 5 minutes. Where Turkey is going. This has been one of the cliches of international relations for a long time now, and my cliche response is nobody knows, including myself. I'm not going to commit my friends here, but I don't know where Turkey is going. I would argue Turkey is not going anywhere. We've been here for a long time, and it seems that we're going to be staying here for a long time, or at least we are intending as Turks. But what has been happening recently, Turkey and Turkish foreign policy, is that I believe Turkey has been redefining its environment with a new perspective that's centered on Turkey. This is different than new. During the Cold War, long Cold War years, and even before that, Turkey was much more, Turkish definition of its environment was much more in connection with world politics and international developments. Now it seems that we are more focused on ourselves, and we are redefining the neighborhood around ourselves with a different view, which is just focusing where Turkey is. From this perspective, I think there are no axes in the world. There are no axes left anymore in the world. So it's superfluous to talk about the shift of axis or change of axis or anything. But also from this perspective, there is a belief, I think, that Turkey has become powerful and influential enough to redefine its neighborhood. And I think some of the abilities that this redefinition requires are there already. This is what at least Turkish decision makers are feeling. So that's why they are trying to utilize those abilities. And I think world politics have been conducive for this kind of attempt, at least for the last 5 years. It's the environment, the international environment, and the international understanding of the regions around Turkey have been more conducive for Turkey to try to redefine a new neighborhood. And was previously. With this kind of a understanding came a kind of a definite focus on regional affairs, which was not a Turkish trait for years during the Cold War. So we have more emphasis on neighborhoods around Turkey, and there is more regional outlook for Turkish foreign policy. This is for sure. And what's happening in even more recent years, last couple of years, maybe it's fortunate or unfortunate, there is an increasingly more attention and emphasis on Middle East as the region. In the early days of current Foreign Minister Ahmet Davutoğlu, there was more emphasis on general regions around Turkey, an attempt to what he says normalization of Turkey's relations with its neighborhood. In those days, there were more attention, divided between different regions, Balkans, and the Caucasus, Black Sea, and Middle East. But in the last 2-3 years, when anybody talking about a region of Turkey, it's Middle East. So, coming back, one of your questions you have given us, Turkish foreign policy is not becoming a single issue like Syria-based foreign policy, but it has been becoming a single region foreign policy. Whether this is good or not, it's a different alternatives. And that Middle East is increasingly defined as what I would call core Middle East, which doesn't include North Africa. It's definitely not wider Middle East that the Americans describe. So it's the core Middle East where Iran, Iraq, Syria, Lebanon, Egypt, and that's it. Nothing beyond. So this is the core area that we have been focusing the last few years, and this area will decide. It has become kind of a make or break point for Turkey. Some of the problems with this understanding and looking for a policy from this perspective, there is definitely, I think, a capacity gap. What Turkey wants to achieve or wants to create around its region, and what's Turkey have as a capacity. When I talk about capacity, it includes almost everything. It includes the personnel capacity of the foreign ministry itself. It includes academic capacity, intellectual capacity of the universities or think tanks. It includes Turkey's economic capacity, military capacity. It includes Turkey's ability or inability to formulate policies that this kind of understanding necessitates. We don't have necessary experience to formulate this kind of policies, and all this come together and create a kind of a capacity gap that forces Turkey sometimes to create half-baked policies and daily responses. Another problem recently, again, I increasingly keep noticing is that what I would call, in short, motto becoming strategy. The motto was, I think we are not using it anymore, zero problem, the scheme famous or famous, where you are looking from, it depends, but zero problem with neighbors motto, which was good as far as mottos go. Every country should have one such big ideal that it should strive to. It was a good idea, etc. But it becomes a strategy. When it becomes a strategy, and if you tie everything and all your policies around that strategy, then it becomes a weakness also. Because the reality of world politics is differ your mottos and ideas. So that's a problem also. And with this problem, of course, this influence area that Turkey wants to create around itself, and especially in the Middle East, has become, I think, kind of a Bermuda Triangle. Israel, Syria, Iraq, and Iran Bermuda Triangle, where we might be losing most of our initiatives. And of course, the agenda of Turkish foreign policy is too crowded. It's dizzying. Turkey has always had crowded agendas, political agendas. Agendas in Turkey daily changes, maybe twice or 3 times in a day. But I haven't remember and remember, and I don't know from my readings, that never ever we had this many issues in Turkish foreign policy. We are dealing so many issues at the same time. This crowd, of course, forces, I think, a kind of a lack of focus also. You are looking different issues at the same time, and you are trying to be active in everywhere. That creates in itself, with the capacity gap also including, that creates a kind of a lack of focus for Turkish foreign policy. So these are, I think, some of the problems that Turkey is facing. If I have time,
You're 10 minutes away.
Okay, thanks. I'll do it in 10 minutes. One of the questions that you asked, and I'll just mention a couple of words there, is about the Turkish-Western connection. I would disagree with many other people that argue that Turkey's Western connection is kind of weakening and Turkey is becoming increasingly Middle Eastern looking country, etc. I would disagree with that. The quality and the style of Turkish connection with the West is changing, that's for sure. And there is a heavy tilt in Turkish foreign policy now with the connection towards the United States rather than Europe. But this is, again, this is not a situation unheard in Turkey. It was during the Cold War. We had a brief period of European supremacy over US connection, but now US connection is coming back, which will have, and I think it's already having ramifications for Turkish domestic policy. Because I believe whenever Turkey has a closer relationship with Europe than the United States, the emphasis in Turkey domestic policy is more democratization, more human rights kind of issues. But when we have closer relations with the United States rather than Europe, the emphasis on Turkish domestic politics is usually on securitization and less emphasis on democracy and etc. So this is, I think, already showing its effects on Turkey of today. Shall I stop? Or continue another half an hour?
No, I think, thank you, that's fine, and I think you raised more points during our discussion. I mean, I have many questions for you, but I'll ask them when everyone has gone through the round. So, Fuat, let us hear your take on where Turkey is going.
Thank you. I could actually second Mustafa. I could second Mustafa by suggesting that Turkey right now, today, as far as I could see, has fallen into what I call a foreign policy impasse. This started with Arab Spring, followed by the warnings signed in Libya, and with the Syrian crisis today. I think we are facing an impasse. And of course, this impasse bears the need for reassessment and recalibration of Turkish foreign policy in terms of its priorities, strategies, capacities, and modus operandi. And there are two sources of this foreign policy impasse, and Mustafa mentioned two of them, but let me put these in my own words. Of course, one actually is Turkish foreign policy with the Syrian crisis has a big capacity gap. No space for maneuverability, and cannot make any difference in Syria. So in this sense, one of course is the capacity gap between what Turkey talks discursively and what happens on the ground. And secondly, is Mustafa put it better than I do, what becomes a strategy. But unlike 2002-2008, when strong Turkish foreign policy was matched by decisive and effective proactivism in reality, today the disjunction between rhetoric of proactivism and reality of proactivism has become widened and deepened. And so in this sense, as opposed to previous years, today we are talking about Turkish foreign policy proactivism, but we are remaining at the level of rhetoric, which cannot translate into reality. in reality, we don't have a proactive Turkish foreign policy, effective Turkish foreign policy. An example, a very illustrative example. For instance, last night I was watching Foreign Affairs Minister Davutoğlu, and he was talking about yet another successful strategy meeting with the US Secretary of State, Hillary Clinton, and Chinese Foreign Minister, and they are supporting Turkish position on Syria. Of course, there are 120 countries in the world supporting Turkish policy position on Syria. But this rhetorical support is not translating itself into a reality. So in this sense, all of these high-level gatherings, meetings, talks, that actually define the motto of Turkish foreign policy is not translating into reality. Turkey is not making any difference in actually Syria, and what Turkey wants and what goes on the ground in Syria actually are two different things. And my fear is if Turkish foreign policy makers do not capture this impasse and do not reassess and recalibrate Turkish foreign policy like they did in 2000-2008, maybe in a couple of months we will be talking about not impasse but a crisis of Turkish foreign policy. And if I have actually time, I talk about academic direction, but I cannot go through it. I think there are 7 factors that created this impasse. And very briefly, maybe I actually list them, and then if there are questions to discuss. First of all, to my reading, it is the Arab Spring itself that ended zero problem with neighbors policy. And neither the foreign policy decision maker, Mr. Ahmet Davutoğlu, nor Foreign Ministry Affairs or those decision makers capture the situation. They are not reading the Arab Spring very well. And Arab Spring from the beginning has been based on actually people's fight with the existing regimes, people's demand for change in the regimes. Whereas Turkish zero foreign policy, zero problem with neighbors foreign policy was based on domesticating and taming authoritarian regimes by enhancing cultural and economic interdependencies with them. So in this sense, Turkish foreign policy should understand that its proactivism based on zero problem with neighbors did not work in Arab Spring. And in Libya, the first slide, and in Syria actually, turned out to be an impasse. Of course, Turkey is not responsible only for this impasse. I think the international community also created a lot of ambiguities and gray areas, while normatively, rhetorically supporting Turkey did not do anything in terms of the Syrian crisis. Thirdly, the Syrian crisis and foreign policy has been over-politicized in Turkey, has been internalized in the domestic politics, and rather than a bipartisan issue, we actually see that the Syrian crisis is being actually discussed in the parliament by political parties to increase their maneuvers vis-a-vis the others. So in this sense, this over-politicization, of course, didn't work very much. Fourthly, as Mustafa Aydın said in terms of capacity gap, Mr. Davutoğlu and the foreign policy decision makers and also foreign policy interpreters around decision makers misread Turkish capacity. Turkey doesn't have a capacity in terms of regime change, and Turkey doesn't have a capacity to change the mind of countries like Russia, Iran, and China. So in this sense, when it comes to Syrian affair, we realize that Turkish foreign policy totally misread the ability of Assad regime to prevail and the ability of Assad regime to get support from countries like China, Iran, and remaining Russia. So in this sense, the illusions of Turkish foreign policy in terms of regime change in actually Syria ended when Assad regime becomes much more stronger in terms of prevailing its power. And of course, finally, fifthly, Turkish proactivism which was based on soft power between 2002 and 2008, and at that time which was very effective in terms of its engagement with the regions, in terms of its contribution to the regions. But of course, when actually Turkish foreign policy switched its motto and strategy from soft power to smart power, from soft power to hard power, from the soft power to regime changer, order maker, rule setter in the Middle East, of course, Turkish capacity hit the wall, because Turkey has no capacity to create order in the Middle East, no capacity to create rules in the Middle East. On the contrary, as a matter of fact, today, Turkish foreign policy is realizing how complicated Middle East is, how crisis-ridden Middle East is, and all of a sudden, we found ourselves in the very strong cleavages in terms of Islam, non-Islam, Arab, non-Arab, Sunni, Shia, so on and so forth, that Turkey cannot handle. So in this sense, one commentator had put it this actually weak Turkish romanticism coming from the Turkish proactivism in terms of Middle East died with the Syrian affair. So in this sense, where Turkey is in an impasse. And if it does not actually reassess itself, if it does not actually recalibrate itself, it might actually turn into a crisis. And here, I will actually make one point, and then let's actually try to elaborate that on the question and answer period. If Turkey, in 2002 and 2008, Turkey was engaging with Middle East, with Caucasia and Balkans, by suggesting that Turkey had a strong anchor with the EU. Turkey has a strong foot in the EU. And it was presenting itself by suggesting that there is a dialectical relationship between Turkish foreign policy in these regions and Turkey's firm anchor with the West. But today, and at that time, myself, for instance, was against the axis-ship debates, and we were saying that Turkey was doing the right thing by actually engaging, but also putting the foot in the West. But in the West, understood as the EU. But today, Turkish foreign policy has no intention whatsoever in the renewing the Turkey-EU relations, has no intention whatsoever keeping its foot in the West, understood as Europe, understood as the EU. Of course, right now, the West is reduced to NATO and the US. But of course, from US and NATO, we get motto, not strategy. We get rhetorical support, not effective, move in reality. But let me elaborate on this issue.
Thank you very much. Please give the microphone to Shula. I see, Shula, that you were nodding a lot.
Yes.
Fuad was talking.
Well, at least I have a different voice than the male colleagues, but I share most of what they have already said. When I see this, where is Turkey going? My heart beats and says, I hope not the war. Because I think there is a very fine line between deterrence and escalation. And what is happening today, I know aware that I'm just talking specifically about the most current and the most heated issue, the Syrian issue. But I'm going to come from there to the more general Turkish foreign policy issues and perspectives. I think what we are now facing is not only an impasse, but already a crisis, because what we have at hand is not necessarily a simple difference of opinions of different academics or politicians, different parties, etc. But I think what is at stake is a very serious, very dangerous development vis-à-vis one of our neighbors. If I'm not wrong, I have not seen Turkey in such a situation before, where Turkey has terrible relations with, at least in the Middle East, with all three neighboring countries. at the same time, simultaneously. And we are talking about a region where most of the Turkish academics have warned the US diplomats when they talked to us in Turkey, when they were entering Iraq, and we have said, don't go there. Middle East is not the Balkans. So I hope we are not going there. And I say this not as a warning to anyone, but I must say that I'm really afraid of what's going on at the moment, because I have a sense, I hope I'm wrong, I have a sense that there is a deliberate escalation, probably in order to enter into Syria. And this is very dangerous, so we must be very careful, and very careful in the parliament too. But in the parliament, I don't see such responsible opposition, basically. Now let me jump to the general side. We are now talking about where Turkey is going in terms of foreign policy. We have been talking about this for a long, long time, and I don't remember how many times I spoke on this issue, and always under the title or subtitle or sub-subtitle of new Turkish foreign policy. So now we are talking probably about new Turkish foreign policy, but let's see if it is that new. The situation today, what we are facing, is new. We have not been close to war with none of our neighbors, including Greece, as we are now. Because what I'm afraid of is not Syria, but Turkey itself. Now, this new foreign policy had some new aspects, definitely. Many of my colleagues, actually including myself, we have argued that the new foreign policy developed under Mr. Davutoğlu was not anything that new, because at least there were two attempts to achieve the same goals of multi-regionalism, good relations with all the neighbors, multilateralism, this and that, under Özal and İsmail Cem. But as a person who has claimed that not much was different than the previous ones, I confess that I was wrong, because there is something different, and that difference is what makes the real difference. That is, before, especially in the beginning of 1990s, when the bipolarity has ended and the world has changed, Turkish activism was, well, there are at least some colleagues who can remember those days, where Turkish activism, active foreign policy, was quite timid. We were doing things, but we were not really, we didn't want it to be misunderstood. We were helping our friends in the region, but we didn't want to be called Big Brother. But now, things are different. Rise to power is, or rise to position. Things are different because now we are not timid at all. We are overestimating our capacities. We are talking too much, and probably we are provoking too much. So things are very different. So you can call it a very, very assertive foreign policy. But assertion has its limits too. It's not only the capabilities of yourself, but assertion has the limits when the other party feels too much pressure on itself. So assertion has a positive and negative qualities. Turkey has been shown by many people, not by only Davutoğlu, but people like myself, including myself, and writing even earlier than Davutoğlu, that Turkey could be a model. Okay? This was criticized so much. Yes, Turkey could be a model for anyone who would want to take Turkey as a model, with all the positive and negative aspects associated with it. Turkey could be a leader. That is possible, but there are limits. In which region, with which country, groups or countries you would be leading. So it is not only what Turkey thinks or what Turkey does, but it is how Turkey is perceived. So my colleague mentioned the term order setter. In which region are you going to set the order? We are not talking about a region which is used to order or had too much or too stable in the negative sense of order, like in the Middle East dictatorships. So now the question is, if Turkey's soft power, which is also based on Turkey's hard capabilities, to say the least, if Turkey's use of soft power, at least in the rhetoric, has come to an end, and when you look at or when you listen to the announcement, be so provocative vis-à-vis Syria. However, don't forget that it takes two to tango. So it was also the Syrian side, not necessarily because of any grudge against Turkey or anything, but it was the Syrian side, it was the Syrian regime that started the terrible developments in Syria itself. So Turkey, in my opinion, so I should give the credit to the Turkish foreign policy makers, Turkey was not in a situation to sit back and just follow. So Turkey had to bet on something, and Turkey bet on the people of Syria. Turkey did not, or at least Turkey did not want to repeat the mistake of its prime minister did during the Libya crisis. NATO cannot go there. What's the business of NATO in Libya? Then switch to the supporting of NATO operations in Libya. So this time, without maybe too hastily, but Syrian crisis got the response. In a sense, it should have from the world. But the problem is, this conjunction in the world, as you very well know, is not how they call it. Is not allowing for Turkey to be so outspoken. Be it for China, United States, Russia, Iran, whatever power around you or outside Turkey, everyone has a reason to support or not to support Syria, but the ones who are going to support, Turkish stance, Turkish position, are not in a situation to move and give active support or the Turkish case. So all in all, I feel that if Turkey has done a mistake in the last couple of years, I think it was Turkey's too much stress on values, on identities, on cultural differences, because I think it backfired. It backfired in two ways, and I'm going to stop now. One way, it didn't help to unite the ones you wanted to unite, your cultural discourse. And secondly, it divided, if not divided, it drifted you apart from the others, and that the others include the EU as well. And of course, the EU has the same cultural discourse too. So I'll stop here.
Thank you very much. Again, Philip, I mean, we've had 3 presentations which are very, very critical of Turkish foreign policy today and where Turkey is going. And it's interesting how each one of them has fed on the other. And you have established scholars that are also telling us, you know, that we've reached a critical point, or we might be reaching a critical point where things might get out of hand, from what I gather. Do you agree with this assessment, or what's your take on where Turkey is going?
You said how you had sent out a list of issues and a list of questions which you felt we could follow up on. What you didn't say when you made your introductions was that you suggested we do this in a Davos-style discussion. Now, given that this is a Turkish audience, it occurred to me, first of all, who would be the person amongst the panel who would hold the microphone? Who would be the person who would storm out of the meeting? And would it all be posted to music on YouTube by the end of the evening? So those are the questions that really sort of come to mind to
But it's not a Turkish audience.
which is why they didn't laugh. Okay, I think you just invited me to defend the AKP position, or the Davutoglu position on Turkish foreign policy. Now, of course, I'm in a very difficult position because I'm a guest here. I'm enjoying the hospitality of my hosts, but I'm also very acutely aware that that I have on the one hand our chairman from Kadir Has giving me one set of steers, and then of course the president of Kadir Has University, who really sort of set the hair running as far as
You understand that this is a very liberal university, a Greek chairing a session on Turkish foreign policy. Turkish scholars, I mean, very liberal.
very, very enlightened. So anyway, let me just try and pick out 2 or 3 issues which I think are salient and which we need to take into account if we're going to give a little bit more added texture to where we are with this particular issue. First of all, on the issue of Ozal and Cem, which Shule mentioned, which I think is a very important corrective to the idea that somehow new foreign policy was invented really from nothing at the beginning of this millennium. That's actually true, and of course Ozal had his own style. Cem, of course, was a great traveller, spent his time going to many different capitals and trying to pour balm on troubled waters where they existed. So from that point of view, from the sort of point of view of the energy of Cem, I think there's a little bit of a sort of resonance as far as Davutoglu is concerned, maybe not in terms of ideas and in terms of philosophical orientation, but certainly in terms of how to manage relations by a sort of constant set of interactions. But I think we also have to remind ourselves that certainly as far as Ozal's contribution, Turkish foreign policy was in a very, very bad state, a very, very difficult state in the mid-1990s. I mean, I can well remember President Demirel coming back from a visit to Georgia in, I think it was 1996, and he got off the plane and he threw open the door of the plane and addressed the multitude of journalists before him, and he said, "Good news, I have come back from Georgia and Turkey has one friend amongst its neighbours, amongst its territorial neighbours, out of the 9 plus in the Black Sea that we were hearing in the presentations earlier on this afternoon." So I mean, there is a sense in which Turkish foreign policy, Turkey's relations with its neighbours in particular, were in very, very difficult circumstances during this time. Another issue, I think, is the sheer global reach of Turkish foreign policy over the last 10 years, or perhaps over the last 2 years. And this is very much, I think, epitomised by Turkey's success, but for the first time since 1961, I think it was, in getting a position at the UN Security Council, one of the non-permanent positions at the UN Security Council. And this was done. I mean, first of all, it was a tremendous achievement. Secondly, it was done as a result of the formulation of the strategy, which was very much about diplomacy on the road, going around the world, discovering regions of the world that Turkish foreign policy had hardly interacted with ever before. And as a result, the actual arithmetic of the results of the poll which took place in order to decide the non-permanent members at that particular point in time were a resounding victory in terms of Turkey's position in that particular international organisation. And it was, I think I'm right in saying that it was an experience which the Turkish foreign policy elite, the Turkish foreign policy community, used in a very effective way, and that was certainly the case as far as Turkish diplomats were concerned, who were amongst the finest and most effective in the world, even when resources are lacking. There was certainly lots of backup at the political level. President Gül in particular, obviously Davutoglu, Erdogan when required. And this really was, I think, very important in terms of a socialization of Turkish foreign policy as far as a global reach was concerned. This didn't necessarily mean that every subject was of equal importance globally. Clearly, some issues were more important than others. It's certainly true that the immediate states bordering on Turkey at this time, particularly in the Middle East, Iran, Iraq, and Syria, had a real premium, a real value assigned to them. But you had this sort of backdrop of Turkish foreign policy, which was incredibly successful otherwise. I mean, when talking about this, when surveying this, I like to use the term a 360-degree foreign policy, because I think it seems to me that you can look back at earlier eras in Turkish foreign policy, and you can see a foreign policy which was less than 360-degree in its application. So I think we have a number of occasions. I mean, even if one goes back as recently as the 80s, certainly the 70s, where the domination of Turkish foreign policy was NATO, Cyprus, Greece. We've really moved a long way since that time was clear. The Arab Spring has come up as well, and here I think it depends on how, I suppose, you approach the Arab Spring, whether you look at every twist and turn, every minutiae of the detail of the day-to-day politicking and policy of the policy towards the spring, or whether you look much more at an outcome-generated performance as far as the policy is concerned. You look at it day by day, and hour by hour, but of course it does undulate. There are momentary mistakes, clearly. There are tactical ploys which then fade away. But I think if you look at Turkish foreign policy towards the first three countries, as far as the Arab Spring is concerned, Tunisia, Egypt, Libya, you could argue that Turkey had a very good start as far as the Arab Spring was concerned, and indeed, more than that, was very sure-footed in the way that it responded to the situation on the ground. In terms of Tunisia and Egypt, the mantra of the Turkish foreign policy was very much let the people decide. And in that particular context, I think it was difficult to argue with that. And in fact, it was some time, I would say, before those sorts of views were taken on board by certain other countries, major countries outside. If you take Britain, Britain's performance in terms of the evacuation of its citizens, of its workers from Libya was much slower and riskier than was the case as far as Turkey is concerned. So this is one of those issues that if it had blown up, if it had not been implemented or executed effectively, it would have become a major issue. The fact that was not the case is easy to forget because of its effectiveness. The situation now is different. When things start to go wrong, Fuad mentioned the beginning of the Arab Spring. I would mention, I think myself, the handling and the mishandling of the Israeli Palestinians. That's not to say that the Turkish government was wrong in the way that it resonated with the suffering of Palestinian people. I think in Turkey itself there's an overwhelming consensus behind the expression of solidarity with Palestinian people. The management of the relationship with Israel was much more problematic. Of course, in many ways, the Israelis have no one but themselves to blame, especially in the so-called short seat incident, which is a stupid, immature way of treating an envoy. But I think it was at that stage that you start to see the aspiration of zero problems really beginning to break down. Once it breaks down, once it is ruptured as a strategy, as a set of guiding values, policy in general, so it becomes more tempting to ditch other areas of relations where relations have been choppy. And from that point, I think we end up with the sort of situation where I think that, just in conclusion, that we have got to a situation where conflict, which seemed to be unlikely and almost impossible, but very unlikely, has now turned into a situation where the effects on the ground are increasingly showing symptoms of miscalculation. And it's just in that sort of context that, as with other examples of miscalculation, conflict becomes more of a likelihood than otherwise would be the case.
Thank you. Obviously, a much more subdued presentation of Turkey and where Turkey is going and Turkish foreign policy. But nevertheless, you raise a few issues that I think are very relevant to our debate here. I mean, I'd like to ask each one of the panelists a question based on what they've talked about. And Mustafa, you talked about, I mean, you started off and you were talking about there's a redefining, Turkey's redefining its environment, and there's a new perspective centered on Turkey. And it's interesting, one can also say, so on Turkey, on its neighborhood, on itself. If you take the Balios case and the Balios verdict, for example, and one looks at the officers that were found guilty, well, one can say that these were the ones representing a certain Eurasian vision of Turkey too. So, which is, you know, an anathema to those that want Turkey more closely linked to the West. The officers that came to power in the 80s and the 90s. So, is this a new redefinition you're talking about? Is that any different than? So when you say redefining, it seems to me that this has happened in the past.
No. This is not what I meant. In the past, of course, we had Eurasianists, if you like to call them, or Westerners, Europeanists, or globalists, internationalists, etc. Or those who wanted Turkey to be more inward-looking country, would have no relations with outside world, etc. These are all visions that has not based on, exactly focused on Turkey. What I meant is Turkey is now, or has been until the last 2 years or 3 years, has been trying to redefine the area around Turkey with a focus on Turkey. Those Eurasianist views are kind of arguing that Turkey should be more, distance itself more from the West, but ally itself with Russia, China, Iran, and non-aligned countries, and etc. But nowadays the emphasis is that Turkey is where it is powerful, and the other countries should ally itself with Turkey. So there is this kind of righteousness, without no timidity, no embarrassment, to say that we are here, we are going to try to set the order to neighboring areas, and this is what Foreign Minister now called normalization of the history. So there is this rereading of the history which went wrong in the early 20th century. It's becoming normal and possibly right with the help of Turkey also. So this is kind of a rhetoric now. You are in international relations. We are used to see from global powers, you know, superpowers like United States, Russia, or empires in the past, Ottoman Empire. We had a history of that. So now Turkey is using such a rhetoric. So it's different than aligning itself with the West, with the Europe, or with Russia. So this is something new. We are here. Let the others understand that we are here to influence, and let them consult Turkey and ally themselves with Turkey if they want to. So this is kind of the different perspective. This is what I mean.
Fuad, you talked about showmanship, which is at some point you talked about the proactivism, and I think you would use the word showmanship as well. And it got me thinking. I remember it was sometime in November 2010, I think, at a meeting here where it was at a meeting that took place, I think, a week or so or two after Erdogan's visit to Lebanon. And I remember a foreign commentator based in Turkey telling us that, again, the example of that visit, I mean, he was talking about the Prime Minister acting like a leader, acting like a national leader on the international scene. And I wonder, I mean, so the criticism there is about basically foreign policy made for an internal audience, right? For your constituents, and not necessarily wisely thought out in terms of foreign policy priorities. So when Erdogan or whoever speaks elsewhere, he's talking not to his host, but to his public. Is that a reality in Turkish foreign policy? Is this something that might have affected or is affecting what Mustafa talked about, the motto becoming a strategy? Is there an element of that?
Actually, one of the very important dimensions of the AK Party success last 10 years was present itself as a new actor in regional and global politics, and by also presenting itself as equal to Turkey, AK Party as Turkey, AK Party representing Turkey inside and also outside. And this has been very successful because of the big opposition and everything. But right now, there are two significant risks being posed to our party and one possible solution. The two significant risks actually is this. Of course, Mustafa is talking about the Arab Spring as a normalization. And we were talking about Arab Spring as normalization in Tunisia, as normalization in Egypt, even in Libya. But Syria, in the beginning we were talking about Syria as part of the Arab Spring, as part of the normalization process, the post-colonial situation. But right now, thanks to Shule's point about deliberate escalation of conflict, I feel that we are talking about Syria as a war possibility between Turkey and Syria. Assad regime, thanks to Russia, China, and Iran, has been successful to separate itself from the Arab Spring. Now we are talking about Turkey left alone in front of Syria, and we are talking about escalated conflict between Turkey and Syria, as if this is not a normalization, as if this is actually some sort of Turkey's imperial design in this region. Second risk, because of that, I agree with Hill that Turkey has been very successful in terms of output generating performance in Tunisia and Egypt. But if Assad remains, if Assad regime prevails, if Turkey-Syria conflict continues as it is, Turkey have the risk of losing its position in Egypt and Tunisia too. Because Tunisia and Egypt, we are talking about Turkey's performance in terms of its contribution to this normalization process on the base of economy, on the base of democracy, on the base of entrepreneur culture, on the basis of civil society development, and on the basis of internal transformation process. Whereas none of these being talked about in Syria right now. So Turkey, I think, is facing the risk of losing its output generating performance even in Tunisia and Egypt if the Syrian crisis continues as it is. It's a conflict between Turkey and Syria. One good solution in terms of your question too is, in one meeting I had the chance to listen to our central bank governor, Erdem Başçı, one day, and then next morning I listened to Ahmet Davutoğlu, our foreign affairs minister. And when you look at these differences between two, Erdem Başçı, because it speaks from the point of view of economy, economic dynamism, his language is global engagement, regional engagement, trade diversification, emergent country Turkey is G20, very proactive, very confident, very actually active. So I think Turkey's strength comes from economy, comes from entrepreneurship, comes from democracy. But next day when you actually listen to Ahmet Davutoğlu, of course, you hear normalization with frustration, because nothing is being normalized in Syria. You hear actually a little confidence, the difference between confidence and arrogance is blurred. It is confident, but it is arrogant. Like, I have to change Syria, we have to change Syria. But the more you actually sound like, arrogant in your assertive foreign policy, of course, it takes two to tango. You get the other side resisting to you, and then you get the Assad regime doing little things, little actually pinchings and everything. So I think we have to learn from Turkey's successful foreign policy in 2002, 2008, where Turkey was had output generating performance in the areas of politics, but in the Syrian regime, when Turkey started talking about regime changes, all order setters, rule setters, in the name of normalization, it finds itself in a very, very serious risk of, taking out of the Arab Spring and bilateral conflict between Syria and Turkey. Syria, backed by Russia and actually Iran, and Turkey's capacity gap becomes very visible. So Turkey should reassess and should recalibrate by going back to 2000 to 2008. But of course, in terms of normalization, we should talk about, for instance, NATO, EU relations, Turkey's foot in Europe, and also some level of normalization between Turkey and Israel. I agree with that. Actually, it starts with that.
Shuli, you talked about values and identities and culture, and I think one of the words that is used often by the government, and even in terms of making policy, is the word justice. It comes out a lot. I think there's even some sort of conference organized by SETA. It's all about justice in this, justice in that. So it's very interesting in that sense. And I, as a foreigner and as an observer living here in Turkey, I remember, what was it, less than 2 weeks ago or so, the AKP Party Congress, where you had the Prime Minister give a talk, and first of all, it's very significant also who were the foreign observers there, give a talk where the West was not mentioned. There were all these values things that came out, and then a couple of days later, one of the first actions the foreign ministry had to take to deal with the Syrian crisis was to ask for Article 4 in NATO to get its NATO allies on board. So it's very interesting, this contrast. You think that this can actually be resolved? I mean, you all sound very alarmist, but this is also the question I will ask Phil. Do you think that there is a way for this government to do the shift so that we do not get to a point where ultimately it's one or the other that's going to stand out?
Okay. I think there is this, I'm not sure if I'm going to use the word correctly, but there is this saying about lust of words. Can we say that? I mean, you are carried away by your own sentences, rhetoric, lost in translation, lost in your mind. I think it's possible. I think it's possible. I have tremendous confidence in, for example, in Turkish foreign bureaucrats. diplomats, Turkish Foreign Ministry, I think they should be, I'm sure they are also trying this, but I think they must be more influential and maybe call the politicians to come to their senses. Because this rhetoric, these explanations, these stresses on values or cultural differences, this and that, all those sentimental language does not help Turkey. And it is not only romanticism, but this is, as I said, now we are in a very critical moment. You said alarmist for all of us, but we are known for our, how should I say, that we are terribly cool. Yeah, always. But this time, at least, maybe you should also think that this is also a point to think about. If Turkey's academics, who are known to be very cool and calm, are now warning about this, I think this is important. I think things may very well get out of hand if necessary breaks are not put on, and this will be, of course, through the bureaucrats, as I said, through the diplomats, and also some military, well, most of them are in, but so I think now we are at a turning point. The other turning point was, as Kadir was mentioning, was Davos actually. Davos was a critical point. It was the peak of sympathy for Turkey and Turkish Prime Minister, who won the hearts of the Arab streets, as it is called. And it was a time when this whole policy of zero problems with neighbors, including Israel, basically, has started to fall apart. So it is also interesting. I mean, the peak becoming the turning point towards a dangerous end.
I mean, you know, Fuad mentioned, he talked about, at least within this party, this governance since 2002, a period between 2002 and 2008, and since then there has been a change. You actually went even further. You are saying that until very recently, even this year, on some of its Arab Spring policies, Tunisia, Egypt, Libya, it has continued with that, but you might have suggested at the end that there might be a turning point, or we have to wait and see. If what our Turkish colleagues are saying is actually something to worry us, how could there be a turning point? How could one go back to, what do we call it? DEFCON, we are at DEFCON 4 now, go back to DEFCON 1 in terms of a danger that might be emerging.
Well, I mean, one's tempted to say that there probably would have to be personnel changes.
Personnel changes.
I mean, I think part of the problem with Syria was that the relationship between Turkey and Syria was not subject to the level of institutionalization that Julie was talking about. If there had been an underpinning of a relationship through the use or the greater use of foreign policy professionals, then I think that would have helped the relationship. As it was, it relied too much on the personalities of the two leaders. And I think both of them, in their own way, felt that they had the other one in the box. That they felt that the other one had effectively deferred to them. Certainly Erdogan did. He was older, he assumed, demanded a certain respect from Assad's side. And I think the vitriol that we've seen in the rhetoric helps to explain why he feels so personally slighted by the fact that Assad has not gone quiet, or has even sort of held out and remained in office. And at the same time, I think Assad felt that he had somehow manoeuvred Erdogan into a position. Yes, he was very much soft-soaping Erdogan, playing up to him, inviting him, making it very, very personal. And I think that he felt with the Arab world behind him, with much of the Middle East behind him, that Erdogan wouldn't ever do anything that would seriously stray from a greater sort of regional position. And I think the antipathy between them is somehow in part explained by that. But it's not just a difficulty between two countries or between two bureaucracies. It's actually very, very personal. And getting over that sort of personal dimension will be very difficult.
Well, thank you. I mean, I could go on and ask questions. For example, we have not even raised the issue of Turkey and Black Sea and the Caucasus. I asked the minister the question, but I will leave this up to the audience. I already see many hands up. Can we start up here? Please introduce yourselves.
Thank you very much. I'm Alexei Malachenko from Moscow Carnegie Center. I have one question to Mr. Aydin. Well, you spoke about Middle East, yes? At the same time, you spoke about your neighbors. Is there a difference between two notions, your neighbors and Middle East? Why I put this question, because you mentioned Egypt. And the second question also very close to the first one, practically something similar. Do you perceive Turkey yourself as a part of a Middle East, or is it something else? Because you mentioned Iran in the frames of a Middle East. However, sometimes this country is considered as a certain outsider. And the question to all of you, indeed, why didn't you mention a Caucasus? Thank you.
Do you want to respond, and then we'll take more questions?
Are there a difference between neighbors and the Middle East? I don't know, I don't think so. In Turkey, most of the people, including myself, I think we consider Turkey a Middle Eastern country forever. I mean, this is different than non-Turkish academics and experts talking Turkey becoming a Middle Eastern country. I consider Turkey a Middle Eastern country during the Cold War and during the 100 years, last 100 years, but I still also consider Turkey a Caucasian country and European country at the same time. So for the Turkish mind, most of the Turkish mind, there is no contradiction being all of this at the same time. But when we hear this argument from non-Turks, and especially Westerners, they are talking now Turkey becoming a Middle Eastern country, meaning that Turkey becoming non-Western and non-European, non-Caucasian. I don't agree with that. So I have no problem Turkey becoming a Middle Eastern country, and I would argue that Turkey is already a Middle Eastern country. I didn't mention Caucasus because Alexander Rondeli, you remember there, we were together a couple of weeks back, maybe a month back in Georgia. I said about Turkish foreign policy in the Caucasus, there is nothing happening there. There is nothing worth mentioning. And as in my opening remarks, as I said, Turkish regional policy has increasingly become Middle East policy. Whatever Turkish foreign policy for the Caucasus was 10 years ago, it's still the same. And if I have to, I actually took note because one of the questions of Dimitri was specifically about this, and I said I put 3 words about Turkish foreign policy in the Caucasus. It's energy, Russia, stability. We want energy resources passing through Turkey. We want stability in the region. We want all this in cooperation with Russia. Whether this is possible or not, it's another matter.
Does anyone want to ask the Caucasus part?
I could.
Yeah, you were nodding again. So, well, Slavomir, here in the center.
Slavomir University of Leeds. First of all, thank you so much for very informed insights into Turkish foreign policy. I suppose, based on your insights, I understand that we all subscribe to the idea that Turkey since 2008 entered what one of academics refers as post-Westernist foreign policy. Now, my question, drawing on Professor Mustafa Aydın's comments on energy, would be how do you see prospects for Turkey of becoming a trading state? A trading state, that's a concept which was coined by, if I'm not mistaken, Rosenkreuz some decades ago. Thank you.
I have no idea. It's Kemal Kılıçdaroğlu.
Yeah, I was going to say. Okay, this gives us a chance to remember our dear colleague Kemal Kılıçdaroğlu, because of course Kemal's version referred to Turkey as a trading state, and basically I mean, we would all share that Turkey's success in foreign policy largely depended on Turkey's increase of economic interaction around itself, and that was the best way to establish any good political relationship. But life is not so smooth all the time. With the Arab Spring, especially when the trade routes, for example, think about Libya, for example, in this case, or with Syria. Now the Syrians are not buying electricity. So we didn't cut it, that's different. I think even there are limits to being a trading state, because trading state refers to times of peace and stability. Now we are not in such a state. So again, I would like to take this opportunity to say that for example, with the motion regarding Syria, I fully understood AKP's position, why there was a need for this motion for the military operations. I can understand that, but the thing is, my fear is that it's not going to stop there, it's going to be, again, I would say, deliberately escalating. So in this situation, it is just like a luxury or fantasy to talk about Turkey's role or capacity as a trading state.
Yes.
The trading state argument comes with a concept which is very important, which also has been coined by Kemal Kılıçdaroğlu and I use it as Turkey's demonstrative effect. Rather than being a model, rather than being an experience or point of aspiration. In real terms, when you look at Turkish foreign policy between 2000 to 2008, but at the same time economically still continues, and when you look at the achievement, the level of success, you see that Turkey has been extremely successful as it associates its proactivism with being a trading state. And that's not only Middle East, through abolition of visa policies and everything, that's also with Africa, that's also with Latin America, Central America, and it's one of the successful emerging markets. That coupled with the cultural relations and cultural interdependencies. And I was in Damascus twice, before the crisis, and my hunch actually is if the Arab Spring started a year later, Turkey's ability to transform Syria internally might be much more than today, but to the extent that it acts as a trading state, it acts as a sort of a cultural exchanges without borders and so on and so forth. And energy, is also like that too. So the trading state relationship between Russia and Turkey is now $40 billion a year. And so in this sense, Turkey has always been very successful in its soft power, when it focuses on being a trading state, being a globally, regionally engaging state, economically and culturally. But when it actually becomes kind of a securitization of this proactivism in terms of regime changer, order maker in Syria, then of course it starts losing its demonstrative effect in trading state too.
Yeah, I think we should. Yeah, I think we should kind of remind ourselves that the Turkish-Russian relationship has been one of the great successes of the post-Cold War era, and going back to the mid-1980s, that was a relationship that could have sort of really dissolved into real antipathy and even worse. There was quite a long agenda of issue which divided the two countries. It actually, what happened was that the complex economic interdependencies which were put in place, which very much benefited both sides, was one which helped to countervail against what might otherwise have been a very serious deterioration in relations. On the issue of Syria, I think for me Syria was more regional. I mean, I hear what you say about the impact of Syria by Turkey's actions and demonstrations and so on. But I think the real impact there was being felt in the north of the country. And therefore I suspect it would have been a rather patchy effect. But who knows what would have happened, maybe not 1 year, maybe 10 years, who knows?
Gaza export was up to 2 billion. So I agree that it's more, but who knows?
Let me argue otherwise. Being a realist in international relations and not liberal, I never bought into this argument of trading state. Long before Arab Spring and long before any change in Turkish foreign policy, and at the height of turning trading state of Turkey, I wrote with a colleague, I wrote an article arguing that in this part of the world where paternalist states are reigning, in the Middle East, and I included even Greece, in this part of the world, politics leads, trade follows. This argument of trading state, liberal, let's start working together on trading, then political reconciliation follows, and etc. It was Özal's argument and its current government's argument. It doesn't work in this part of the world. Our trade with Syria increased, our trade with Iran increased, our trade with Greece increased because political reconciliation, because of earlier political decision-making and understanding that the relationships with these countries should improve. Our argument at that paper was that whenever there was a change of heart politically, the trade relationship between these countries would follow and would change again. So this is what's happening already. Trading state is a good argument, I think, but I think in the Middle East, it's not working. And one more point, we're talking about the turning point in Turkish foreign policy, and I put it in 2007, 2008. I would give you a more definite date. It's July 2011. If you force me, I can look up and give you even a single specific date. This is the month there was an election propaganda in Turkey. If you follow the election propaganda, different parties, and if you follow the Prime Minister's speeches or rhetoric during that, he become more nationalist in his rhetoric. He started increasingly resemble what was 10 years ago these Eurasianist people were arguing in Turkey. So that's the change, time of the change, at least on the rhetoric. Then the foreign policy change started to change also, Syria and Israel, etc. But another caveat maybe, Prime Minister Erdogan is a very successful politician. And his foremost thought has always been in his domestic audience. Even talking about foreign policy, he always looks or thinks domestic audience. And this also includes in his rhetoric in abroad. He always had harsh rhetoric, but he also, the government had this ability of having a harsh rhetoric, for example, against NATO, against United States, against West. But indeed, they were different. You know, when they were criticizing NATO in Libya and trying to distance Turkey from NATO or West or Western imperialism, etc., but Turkey at the same time accepted defense shield and base radars in Malatya, in Turkey. So the rhetoric and the deeds have been kind of successfully separated. Maybe now what's happening in Syria, and we should not become prisoners of the daily politics, because we are so close to it and we are kind of excited what's happening daily. Maybe we are not analyzing in a right way, but what's happening is now, I think Turkey has become or becoming a prisoner of rhetoric and prisoner of the momentum. This is a well-known, we are entering kind of cycle of escalation. When you enter there, then it's almost impossible to get out. You know, even if you realize that you are into the escalation and you are in the cycle, it doesn't make any difference. It's very difficult to cut loose and come back.
Okay, I think Fuad wants to comment. Take the microphone.
Just one comment. Actually, I agree with Mustafa, and I was thinking about how successful Erdogan has been politically. So his ability to maneuver, you know, pragmatism, flexibility. But one thing that bothers me is the following. The convention you mentioned, there was no reference to 2.5 hour speech. I listened to it very carefully. There was only one reference to EU. And there were also, like the invited speakers, there was only one European show there, but it came from the Russian guesting, so it was not constituted. So it was, and then you mentioned, for instance, this weekend Istanbul, global forum based on justice. There is no one huge crowd, but there is no one European and the Americans. So it's a different way of global. And I know why he's doing it, coupled with nationalism. 2014, there are presidential elections, and if you look at it from the political point of view, he's right. As a politician, that he makes sure that he wins, because in presidential election based on people's votes, you have to have 51% in the first round. If you don't, then you might get weakened. But in Lebanon, in Syria, in Iraq, in Israel, in Iran, people are not talking about Turkey's presidential elections. I don't know if this escalated conflict in Syria can last until 2014. Or Ban Ki-moon says if this escalated conflict reflects in or projects in Lebanon, very, very serious situation. If Israel attacks Iran, very, very difficult situation. So in this sense, there is a gap between what Erdogan wants to do and the realities that surround Turkey, which is actually a very, very crisis-ridden reality. And this time, actually, I don't think Turkish foreign policy can be restructured, can be reordered on the basis of the presidential elections in Turkey. Too long to wait. 2012 and 2014. I don't think 2 years can be actually wasted or sort of put into this presidential election type of. What do you think?
Sure, definitely.
I think the world has got used to Erdogan's gesture diplomacy, or countries that take a more balanced view of these sorts of issues. But the tolerance is there much more for the use of gesture diplomacy domestically than externally. No matter what the relationship might be with the EU or with NATO, if we end up in a hot war, this will count against Turkey for 20 years.
Okay. We are sort of running over time, but I see I've identified 4 people that want to ask questions, so I'll take 2 questions, let the speakers respond, and the other 2. So we start with you, Sebastiano, back there. Then you.
Thank you. I'm Sebastiano Sali, King's College London. Thank you very much first for all your interventions, very insightful. My question is, of course, for all of you, whoever is interested to give me an answer. Considering that after the downing of the Turkish military jet in June and after the shelling of Akçakale, Turkey called in an urgent and immediate NATO meeting, and considering that in the last few months the American Foreign Minister Ms. Rodham Clinton spent almost more time in Istanbul than in the US, and then Davutoglu started flying more often to Brussels and to European capitals rather than to Erbil or Tehran or obviously Damascus. Isn't it clear where is Turkey going? My understanding is Turkey is clearly going back to its own old allies. So the question should be, how is it going back to those allies? Like the arrogant young boy who tried to grow up too quickly and clearly fell short, or is going as a peer, like a NATO member who's asking, probably with his own right, to be defended by the other NATO partners. So do you think, which one of the question? Thank you.
Okay, we'll take another one also. Yeah, no, yeah. Here. Take all four.
My question is to everybody, basically to unite two big topics of this panel.
One was to speak for 2 hours more, right?
Okay. One was about this redefinition of Turkish foreign policy as came with Erdogan Davutoglu team, so that it's more centered on Turkey and based on kind of new confidence of Turkey as an independent center of power. But the other topic was the trouble with Syria, that Turkish foreign policy is in an impasse, and I just wonder whether there is some linkage between the two, because with Syria, Turkey is in an impasse, but everybody is the whole world is in an impasse. It was the assumption that the Arab Spring was marching on, and then in Syria things went wrong. And Turkey, just bad luck of Turkey that we happen to be immediate neighbors, but in that sense also France and the US and everybody is in an impasse. Is it that you are just unlucky, got unlucky because of neighborhood, and there may be some tactical mistakes like carried away by your own rhetoric, but it's made also true of Western powers, or there is some kind of strategic mistake was made with regards to Syria, and now, this crisis or this impasse is the result of some larger strategic mistake.
Okay, well, I will have you answer, who wants to answer either one of these two questions?
Right, I'm sure we'll all have a go. On the issue of NATO, I think it was quite clear what happened with the aircraft that was down. And there seemed to be sort of 3 phases to it. The first phase, which I think was very much associated with President Bush, was to keep calm, find out what happened. And that seems to me to have been a very prudent and a very responsible reaction. And then there was a second part to the reaction as we went through the weekend, which is that the Turkish side discovered the aircraft as an issue within NATO, as a potential issue within NATO. And Foreign Minister Davutoglu started really talking up the threat and the acceptable way in which Syria had handled the affair. And then the third part of this particular episode was the very, very lukewarm NATO response to the entreaties by the Turkish side. And I think that as a small microcosm, as a small case study, gives us a sense of the dynamics, but also the divided dynamics on the Turkish side.
I think it's typical of Turkish foreign policy. When there is a crisis, we revert back to old, classical, traditional policy of going back to NATO. We have invested a lot in NATO, and it's a sure way of getting a direction during a crisis time. So I think anytime there is a crisis, a real crisis, we just run back to NATO and seek support. And it's normal. I think it's normal. It should be, as it should be. And secondly, what Philip said, and maybe Fuad might have comment on this, and you ask in your questions whether there is this connection between domestic, the interplay of domestic and foreign policy. I think as we are running towards the presidential elections, and as Prime Minister might become a president, people are now kind of repositioning themselves to him, and this is actually affecting their rhetoric, if not deed. So people are now talking with domestic scene on their mind. They are talking about the foreign policy. So I think what Philip indicated is quite right. You, Prime Minister Erdogan, and also Roundtable are all taking positions, thinking 2 years ahead, not today's realities, but I'm not an expert on domestic politics. And one last word about this bad luck of being Turk neighbor. Well, this has been our neighborhood, and we've been in bad luck of being in this neighborhood for forever now. But we have a former foreign minister here. He would, I'm sure, back me up. There has been a saying in Turkey and Turkish foreign policy traditionally that whatever happens in this neighborhood will be here. You know, whenever there was a pressure from United States or Europe or any other country to do something in this neighborhood for Turkey, to create an embargo or to be active in this neighborhood. You know, in 1991 against Iraq, in 2003 against Iraq, even today against Iran. You know, when there is a pressure from the West to create something, to force Turkey to take an active stance in the region, the traditional response, the first response is that, okay, we can do this, but after the crisis you leave and we'll be here to face the news. But this is for the first time in the Syrian case that Turkey is actually taking, it seems that Turkey is taking the lead, trying to convince the West to be more active in Syria and active with Turkey. So this is what is actually kind of troubling us and maybe making us more alarmist, because this is kind of uncharted ways for the Turkish foreign policy. So we make policy as we go along, and this is, it looks dangerous or feels dangerous.
The situation in a very geopolitical way, and unless Russia gets what it wants, then you cannot move the Assad regime. Iran is not in an impasse. Iran has a geopolitical stand there, and it's not going to move. And in that sense, you know, when we talk about the Syrian crisis, we are talking about two crises at the same time. One is a humanitarian crisis, and you know, this all problems and everything. And second is a geopolitical crisis, where, for instance, the Syrian crisis might be accelerated towards more regional crisis, and then people start playing actually two games at the same time. One, what's happening in Russia, in Syria. One, the other one actually, what is going to happen in the Middle East, in actually Arab region, and all this actually, you know, geopolitical game. And one commentator put it very well that when talking about Syrian crisis, two incommensurable languages being used. One actually is language that Turkey uses, humanitarian, democracy, change in Syria, so on and so forth. Another, for instance, Russia, Iran, and China uses, very geopolitical, very actually interest and national interest based. So in this sense, not everybody is in impasse. But going back to our friends from Britain's question, for me, for instance, if Turkey enhances its relation with the West in the real term, for instance, maybe like Ian Lesser says, rather than blocking NATO-EU connections, maybe actually enhance that connection, or normalize its relations with Israel, or actually does more in terms of Turkey-EU relations, does more in terms of contributing to the larger architecture of the European Union, so on and so forth, then of course Turkey becomes much more multilateral in the way in which it approaches the Syrian crisis, which is a much more stronger position than the unilateral one where you are left alone in front of the Syrian crisis. So in this sense, there are things to be done in the Syrian crisis. But going back to your question, which is very important for me, I think the Syrian crisis has indicated that the Turkish foreign policy and proactivism cannot be carried anymore on the basis of strategic depth and this civilizational or other type of discourses that we have had so far. I think there is a need to reassess and there is a need to recalibrate. And then one thing that actually can be done is Turkey's push in terms of democracy, Turkey's push, for instance, in terms of domestic politics and all these things that Turkey can be done. But purely strategical way of looking at the world on the basis of order changing or rule making is not working anymore, and that's what is happening right now.
Okay, I promise 2 more questions quickly, and then Julia will respond. Oh, you want to respond?
Yeah, I want to say something. I don't think there are many Turkish-speaking people in the room, but there's a saying in Turkish, her şerde bir hayır vardır, which means there is good in every evil. I'm not sure if this may be the case, but this may be the Syrian situation, maybe Turkey's chance for a reality check. So it is important. And something very small, a small note about NATO and international interventions. Turkey has been, especially in my case, knowing the Balkans better than the Middle East, I can confirm that Turkey has always been in favor of international, multilateral military intervention when there is a gross humanitarian situation, or when the situation required the responsibility to protect the civilians. But the thing is, in Bosnia, in Kosovo, and in other places, Turkey did not consider for a single moment, as far as I know, of unilateral intervention. In this case, Turkey is escalating the situation in such a way that Turkey may find itself pushed towards into the corner that even NATO may think that this was Turkey's fault. So this is important. I think we must. The reason why I feel alarmed is this situation is very different. Because in Turkey's relations with Syria, this means war. It is not unilateral, it's not even unilateral intervention.
Okay, last 2 questions. Yes, you here, and then we go to because dinner is waiting. A lot of you are hungry.
Hello again. My question to the moderator of our session. Last day, the EU released the progress report on candidate countries. How do you find the context of the report, and were you expecting an increase as a level of aggression? Thank you.
Okay. And Hannah.
Thanks a lot. Hannah Shalas, National Institute for Strategic Studies, Ukraine. I have a question to all of you as, do you see the foreign policy of Turkey as reactive or proactive? Meaning is it envisioning where Turkey should be in 20 years? Or the last 20 years were mostly reaction to the events going around, I mean from the collapse of the Soviet Union to the events around the Middle East?
So, I'll answer first. Who wants to answer? Anybody wants to answer? The question today was about the progress reports, right? And Well, no, I mean, I read it some. I'm trying to finish a paper on this. I mean, the progress report is within the framework of the positive agenda of November 2011. So it's a new phase in EU-Turkey relations. Otherwise, what it says in there, especially when it comes to foreign policy, I don't think is any different than what has been said in the report last year and the year before that. The Cyprus issue, the good neighborly relations, plus an alarmist, where I'm sure my country also has a role in shaping it, but when it comes to these things, but then there's again, an alarmism keeps coming up, the word keeps coming up, regarding what is happening domestically here a little bit, with regard to the institutions, which is interesting because this is rhetoric that might have disappeared in the past, the way, over the last few years, but it's coming back. So there's, questions about the judiciary or some other parts of Turkish institutions that might or might not be functioning the way they might have been functioning better a few years ago. But other than that, I don't see the progress report as necessarily anything different than what has been in the past. I mean, I don't know if that was your question. I mean, it was to be expected that these things would be on there. But I think what one needs to stress in the progress report is that it starts off with the so-called positive agenda. And let's see how that can be shaped. This is what I have to say. It's just what? Yes.
I think if you look at Turkish proactive foreign policy from a larger, broader context, which is the context of globalization, in which we are having a global shift towards the East, Turkish proactivism will remain, and Turkey will be an important actor regionally and globally. But sometimes looking at the issues, the larger picture is good, but sometimes when you have a crisis in front of you, which might actually create really negative results for your proactivism too, then you have to actually focus on the reality right now. So in this sense, we have to make a distinction between larger, broader context and Turkish foreign policy and what is happening right now in the Middle East. And my fear actually is Turkey's proactivism. Turkey has benefited from globalization, global shift, but those benefits might end if Turkey gets stuck with this kind of crisis and becomes more and more, as Shula says, unilateral, and finds itself, getting more and more dragged into the crisis in front of us.
Okay. Well, I think that's the last word for today's panel and today's discussions. I'd like to thank all our speakers for this very interesting discussion on Turkey. We went way over time, so thank you very much. I'm sure they would be available to talk to you more over dinner. We are going to have a dinner right now. Through that door on the second floor, you follow the signs, and Kadir Has staff will guide you.